Imagine waking up on a summer morning in Britain more than a century ago. You open the bedroom window expecting a cool breeze, but instead, warm air comes rushing into the room. The sun is already bright, the streets are unusually dry, and you can feel that something is different. There is no air conditioning to switch on, no smartphone to check the temperature, and no weather app warning you that another extremely hot day is coming. This was Britain in the summer of 1911, when an extraordinary period of heat and dry weather affected large parts of the country and became one of the most memorable hot summers of the early 20th century. Today, when Britain experiences a heat wave, people immediately start talking about it. Television programs discuss the temperatures, newspapers publish warnings, and millions of people check their phones to see how hot the next few days will become. In 1911, life was completely different. Weather information traveled much more slowly, and ordinary families had very few ways of protecting themselves from extreme heat. Yet people still had to go to work, children still had to play, trains still had to run, horses still had to pull vehicles through the streets, and families still had to carry on with everyday life. The summer of 1911 became particularly remarkable because the hot weather lasted for an unusually long period. The country experienced prolonged heat and dryness, and on 9th August, temperatures reached 36.7 degrees Celsius at Raunds in Northamptonshire. At the time, this was an extraordinary temperature for Britain and remained close to the country's record for many decades. Imagine what that temperature would have felt like in Britain in 1911. There were no modern air-conditioned buildings where people could escape for hours. There were no supermarkets filled with refrigerated drinks and cold air. There were no powerful electric fans sitting in every bedroom. For many families, their homes were their only shelter, and traditional British houses could become extremely uncomfortable during prolonged hot weather. Bedrooms were particularly difficult. Many houses had small upstairs rooms beneath roofs that absorbed the heat throughout the day. By evening, the walls and roof could still be radiating warmth. Families would open windows as wide as possible, hoping that even the smallest breeze might make the room more comfortable. Curtains could be closed during the hottest part of the day to keep direct sunlight out, while windows might be opened again when the evening became cooler. But sometimes there simply wasn't enough breeze. Outside, the streets of Britain looked completely different from the streets we know today. In cities such as London, horse-drawn vehicles were still an important part of everyday transport. Imagine horses pulling heavy carts and carriages across dusty roads under a powerful summer sun. The roads themselves could become dry and uncomfortable, while people traveling through the city searched for whatever shade they could find. Men might remove their jackets when they could, while women used hats, parasols, and light clothing to protect themselves from the sun. People carried handkerchiefs and searched for shaded streets, trees, and buildings whenever possible. Even a short journey could feel exhausting when the temperature remained high. And there was another problem that made the situation more serious. The heat was accompanied by a lack of rainfall. Britain is famous for its rain today, but during prolonged dry periods, water supplies can become a major concern. In 1911, the dry conditions placed pressure on water resources, while farmland and grasslands also suffered. For farmers, extreme heat wasn't simply uncomfortable. It could affect the entire livelihood of a family. Crops needed water, grass needed rain, animals needed drinking water and fresh vegetation. When the weather stayed hot and dry for too long, farmers could see the effects around them. Fields became dry, grass became less plentiful, and livestock struggled with the conditions. Milk production could also be affected because animals depended on adequate food and water. A heat wave that seemed like a weather story to people in the cities could therefore become an economic problem for families working in the countryside. For workers, the heat could be especially difficult. Britain in 1911 was still heavily dependent on physical labor. Thousands of people worked outdoors or in factories and workshops where modern ventilation and cooling systems simply didn't exist. Construction workers, laborers, railway workers, farmers, and other workers had to continue working despite uncomfortable temperatures. There was no button they could press to make a room cooler. For many workers, staying home because of the heat simply wasn't an option. Families depended on their wages, so the working day continued despite the uncomfortable temperatures. Travelling wasn't easy either. Britain's railways were already busy, but old train carriages had no air conditioning. Passengers depended on open windows and whatever natural breeze they could find. Yet people still travelled to work, visit relatives, and carry on with everyday life. People had to use simple ways to stay cool. They drank cold water, washed their faces, and looked for shade under trees or in public spaces. Those who could afford it sometimes escaped to the countryside or Britain's seaside towns, where the sea breeze offered some relief. But for many working-class families, the heat simply had to be endured at home. Another major difference was information. Today, a heatwave warning can appear instantly on your phone. In 1911, newspapers were one of the main ways people learned about extreme weather. Families read reports about the heat and drought while experiencing the same conditions outside their windows. The heat also had a serious human cost, particularly for vulnerable people. Extreme temperatures were not simply uncomfortable, they could become dangerous. Eventually the rain returned and temperatures fell. Life slowly went back to normal, but the summer of 1911 remained unforgettable. More than a century later, Britain still struggles with extreme heat. We have fans, refrigerators, air conditioning, and instant weather warnings. Yet when temperatures rise, we still search for shade, cold water, and somewhere cool to escape. The buildings have changed, the technology has changed, but the feeling of asking, how can Britain possibly be this hot, hasn't changed at all. The summer of 1911 reminds us that Britain's history isn't only about famous people and major events. Sometimes history is simply a family opening every window, a worker searching for shade, a passenger sitting beside a train window, or a child trying to escape the summer sun. Britain may be famous for its rain, but the summer of 1911 proved that it could get incredibly hot too.